So welcome everyone. The Leicester Human Rights Arts and Film Festival is now in its 10th consecutive year, and it aims to draw attention to human rights issues at home and abroad. The festival also aims to draw attention to Human Rights Day, which is marked every year around the world on this day, on 10 December. This year, the festival is being organized in association with Forced Migration in the Arts, and is drawing attention to calls for ceasefires around the world, as well as raising awareness around the crime of genocide. With this in mind, we have declared the month of December to be both Ceasefire Month and Genocide Awareness Month, and the 4th to the 10th of December, the duration of this festival, to be both Ceasefire Week and Genocide Awareness Week. And we've declared the 10th of December, which is today, and which is Human Rights, to also be Ceasefire Day and Genocide Awareness Day. We've done the same with December 25, which is Christmas Day. We believe we are declaring it to also be Ceasefire Day and Genocide Awareness Day. For this session today, we've got 3 speakers. We've got Dr. Raul Cârstocea, who is a lecturer in 20th century European history and is based at the National University of Ireland. And we've got Basma doukhi, a Palestinian academic, human rights activist, and humanitarian practitioner who's worked for more than 14 years in humanitarian and development settings with UN agencies, international NGOs in the MENA region and also in the UK. Basma was raised and lived in our Rashideh Palestinian Refugee Camp in the South of Lebanon and is currently based in Canterbury in the UK. And we've got Alex Korb, who is Associate Professor in Modern European History at the University of Leicester and is based in the Stanley Burton Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And we've got Dr. Martin Stern, who is a retired doctor, survivor of the Nazi concentration camp, Theresienstadt. And today we're talking about genocide. But before we do that, maybe we go to our speakers, and maybe if you could tell us, how did you get to genocide studies?
Thank you very much for that question. Well, I mean, I'm originally from Romania, and when I went to school and studied, we didn't learn anything about genocide being committed on the territory of the country or by Romanian authorities. And then as I started reading literature about the Holocaust in English, and I discovered that Romania was identified as the second perpetrator country after Nazi Germany, that the Romanian authorities killed between 250,000 and 350,000 Jews during the Holocaust, independently of Nazi Germany and without sort of pressures from Nazi Germany. And back in my day, like I said, this was not part of Romanian historiography. It has been increasingly so as of late because researchers have started working on this. But I began to be interested, and I began studying this because I wanted to understand why this discrepancy, why in scholarly works outside the country this was widely acknowledged, while the country chose amnesia over the genocide it committed during the Second World War and conveniently placed the guilt entirely on Nazi Germany. And of course, the more I got into this, the more I discovered that it's relevant to study such peripheries of the Holocaust and refer to them. Oh, look who's there. And that basically our understanding of the Holocaust and of genocide changes when we look at these margins and we look at different perpetrator groups, we look at different groups of victims, we differentiate between local patterns of deportation and mass murder and so on. So the short story of my interest in the topic.
Thank you, Raul. How about you, Basma?
Hello, everybody. Actually, it started from my personal background as a third generation of stateless Palestinian and then Palestinian refugee in Lebanon. So it started from the stories of my grandparents who were expelled from Palestine in 1948 due to the ethnic cleansing, and trying to understand what's happening and how we can relate that to the concepts and the margins and whatever called the genocide. And then also during my professional work with UN agencies in conflict zone, like in Syria and in Iraq. So trying to understand also how the war crimes are connected to genocide and if they are really also having any kind of relationship between the concept of genocide and the margin of genocide. But recently also, unfortunately, the heartbreaking genocide, which is taking place in Gaza as well. I don't have family in Gaza, but I do have, and in occupied Palestine as well. So not only in Gaza, in West Bank and in Jerusalem as well. So I don't have family there, but I do have friends, and I have families of friends and my people actually. So yes, seeing what's happening in Gaza and trying to understand the relationship between the mass displacement, mass killing, slaughter of Palestinians with also the concept of genocide and the margins, which is a genocide as a case study by context as well. So yeah, this is how I come. It's mainly from my personal background to push me to understand the experiences and the war crimes happened to my people from 75 years old, and unfortunately it's still ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Alex?
So as with the others, my interest in genocide also stems from my upcoming and from where I'm from as a German. I of course grew up with well, the story of the Holocaust around me, with the perpetrators still alive at the time. And in the case of Germany, up until the 80s, studying the Holocaust was sort of like against the mainstream. It was a bit like being a little bit of a radical pain in the society. And that, of course, changed in the 2000s when Holocaust studies in Germany and the commemoration of the Holocaust became mainstream. But that was different when I was younger. So as somebody from a sort of critical background, you were drawn into the subject quite automatically. At the same time, my parents are from Eastern Europe, from Prague, and when traveling Eastern Europe, I always realized that how much the Holocaust is intertwined with other inter-ethnic conflicts and cases of ethnic cleansing. So I kind of started understanding the bigger picture early on, and only as a student and later as an academic, I studied that more systematically, how the Holocaust and other cases of mass expulsion or genocide often overlap or are intertwined, which is, I think, a very interesting lesson and an important one. And then later on, I understood that this is even sort of true globally, so that we don't only compare genocides in terms of their size and magnitude, etc., and goals, but that they are often interrelated. So the genocide, the French genocide in Algeria in the 1950s links to what happens in Europe during the Second World War. Or of course, the Holocaust also links to the Nakba in Palestine, whether you call it a genocide or not. And so this kind of transnational interest of comparison is something that grew and grew and grew dear to me, and this is where I am today.
Thank you, Alex. How about you, Martin?
Well, I wasn't given the choice. At age 5, I was picked out of school and put into a place that is sometimes called a concentration camp and sometimes called a ghetto. It was quite exceptional. Most of my Jewish friends from the Netherlands, where I was born, were sent to Sobibor or Auschwitz. If I'd gone there, then my life expectancy on arrival would have been something like 2 hours. But the Nazis had a cunning plan to try to deceive the outside world about what they were doing. They stole a town from the Czechs, they emptied it, and they housed their Jews who had connections in the outside world, and they used those Jews to pretend that they were resettling Jews and not mass murdering them. The intention was that every one of us would die. Trains were leaving all the time, taking about 1,000 people at a time to their deaths. I was taken from amongst the other children by a woman prisoner who looked after us, my sister, my one-year-old sister and I, in women's dormitories. And so when a train left to take the children to be exterminated, we were there waiting for that train, but our names were not called. And I guess the list was made from the list of children in the children's building, and the fact that this woman had kept us away from them meant our names were not on the list. The very efficient Nazi machine slipped a cog. So here I am. So I came to Britain. I'm an immigrant in Britain, and I practiced medicine. And after I retired, the National Holocaust Center, the Smith family, which runs that, found out that they thought I was at the loose end. And they took me to that center and said, stand up there and tell them your story. And I've been doing that since, except that I realize it's not my story because I was a little kid. I didn't make any decisions. Not much of a story, but around me were adults, and that's a hell of a story, the story of those adults. And that I discovered you can't really teach without learning. And so now I spend far more time studying the Holocaust and genocide than actually talking about it. And I discover new areas of ignorance every day. That's a useful thing to do. There are too many people in the world who know almost nothing, but have great certainty that their conclusions are right. So I was sort of drawn into the orbit of the Stanley Burton Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. I was in a tiny way concerned with its starting, in that some of the funds I raised for medical research by working for drug companies went to the Stanley Burton Center. It was all the University of Leicester, which is what the checks were made out to, so that was easy. And here I am.
Thank you, thank you. And this is for all of you. Maybe we stick to the order with which we started. How would you describe the time that we are in? What are you seeing? What are you seeing, and what do you think about the time that we are in right now?
Well, I mean, if you want me to butt in, I think we're living in a horrendous time. Vast numbers of people dying. We've had wars in other parts of the world continuously since the Second World War, but Europe has been a relatively quiet spot because what happened in Europe was horrific, not only for the Jews, but for vast numbers of other people. It absolutely wasn't just Jews who suffered. And I guess one reason why Europe's been relatively peaceful is the horror in people's minds of what happened during World War II. But now we've got wars not only in the Democratic Republic of Congo, not only in Syria, Iraq, Iran and Saudi Arabia don't seem to be too friendly. Pakistan and India, I mean, all over the world, much of Africa is racked by armed, lethal conflict and horrors, even when people are not killed. And now we've got a war in the middle of Europe, in Ukraine, a war we thought we'd never see. And of course, the horrific events in the Middle East at the moment, with a focus currently on Israel and the Gaza Strip. But not only those. I mean, there's also there is conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and conflict with Syria, and conflict not only in Gaza but in the West Bank. So it's becoming very hot, and all of this is horrific.
How about you, Alex?
Yeah, I think the degree of violence intensifying around the globe is horrendous. But I think there's also like a pattern, and I think it's a bit sort of the challenge that Western democracies are facing at the moment, and that sort of invites perpetrators to become active. So of course Putin's war against Ukraine, which I would also call ethnic cleansing, because Ukrainians had to flee from Ukraine, and before Muslim Tatars had to flee from Crimea because of the Russian aggression. The Venezuelan dictator just attempts to annex half of a neighboring country, and I think here Russia serves as another role model. And of course, Hamas also felt invited by the weakness of the Israeli democracy to attack Israel. So there can be any doubt about it. And of course, these anti-democratic movements are often sort of connected. So by supporting each other silently or more openly. So that is sort of the global picture, and I think well, just this year we have the ongoing collective violence or mass violence in Ukraine. We had, and that's something that was often neglected, at the huge campaign of ethnic cleansing in against Armenians. By the Azeri state and military. So an entire region, Nagorno-Karabakh, has been ethnically cleansed. We had the Hamas attack on Israel with its massacres. And now we have the war in Gaza. So 4 horrendous wars in just 1 year. And so this is where we are. And I think this is what we need to discuss. Why is there such a increase of violence, and what can be done about it?
How about you, Basma?
Actually, starting from the language that we are using, which is completely legally wrong and also dehumanizing. First of all, it's not a war. It's not Palestine and Gaza, it's occupied Palestine, and Gaza, in the law, it's a Palestinian territory. So when we say Palestine, Israel, Gaza, it's legally wrong and also dehumanizing narrative against the people or who are now the victims of genocide. Number 2, it's not a war, actually. It's mass displacement. War, it's between 2 balanced states or entities, and it's not a balance now. And it's not Basma saying this. You can go and read legal conventions, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and a lot of other also Geneva Convention, and a lot of legal instruments. So using the language is really important here to describe, because if you use the improper language, you are also supporting the dehumanization of the victims, which in our case now, because he mentioned about Gaza. So I just wanted to reflect about that, about the issue of the genocide and the issue of the language, actually, and the narrative, why it's really important to describe things as they are, using proper descriptions and definitions. And acknowledge also not only the experiences and the suffering and the experience of living under genocide, but also the importance of using the legal terms, building on the legal conventions and also the legal instruments. So
I think I've
just to
heard more
clarify
errors
this.
there
Thank
than
you.
I could possibly answer in the length of this conversation.
How about you, Raul?
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more that we are living in absolutely horrendous times. And if Basma was pointing attention to the importance of language in describing what we're living through, and I would absolutely agree. I would also point at the difference between legal definitions and historians' definitions of genocide, which may diverge quite widely. There might be a UN Convention on Genocide, which a number of states have signed, by no means all UN states. But at the same time, historians operate with very different definitions of genocide, and there will never be a common language that everyone agrees on, because there are always sides to a conflict, and there's no such thing as a neutral position. That we are always involved in one way or another, no matter how objective we try to be. But as Basma was pointing at the attention to language, I would point the attention back to history, because again, thinking of my formative years, becoming an adult, there was this optimism, right? After 1989, the first decade of the 90s was this absolute optimism, that with the fall of communism, we're entering an era of prosperity, of peace. Europe was expanding. And thinking of what Martin was saying, I think this was the exact opposite of the attitude in 45, which was absolute pessimism. It was like, what have we done, was the approach in 1945. And I think if we managed to have peace in Europe between 1945 and the 1990s, and yes, that peace comes with caveats, because there was peace in Europe, but European powers were fighting colonial wars, and they were fighting against decolonization movements outside of Europe. So there wasn't proper peace, but there was peace on the continent. But I think that peace was very much building on this absolute pessimism of what Europe had done in the last conflict. And I think this optimism in the 90s was extremely dangerous. It was also blind to wars that were ongoing at the time. Just as this triumphalism in the 90s was proclaiming a peaceful and united Europe, Yugoslavia was, a bloody, not one, but several bloody conflicts were raging in Yugoslavia. There were conflicts in the former Soviet Union already in the 90s. Alex mentioned earlier Nagorno-Karabakh and the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. That was already going on in the 90s, but Europe chose to look away. Europe chose to look away and tell itself this narrative of we've come out of the dark ages now. Just last week, I was at the conference in Strasbourg, and Timothy Garton-Ash, who's a very prominent historian and journalist and political analyst and all those things, began his talk by mentioning a thing he heard an East Berliner say on the morning after the fall of the walls, on the 10th of November, the day after the wall came down. This East Berliner said, "Only today is the war finally over." And in the Q&A session, I challenged him, saying, this is a very optimistic narrative. This is a very teleological narrative, a very East German narrative, but also one that's overly optimistic, because it is the one I grew up with, so I know it very well. This was the atmosphere, but I think that's exactly what paved the way to what we have now, because we shouldn't have been surprised. We shouldn't have been surprised in 2014, because Russia had done it earlier in 2008 in Georgia. And in 2014, everyone was caught by surprise. And still we thought, let's, small local conflict. And what we had in 2022 was no longer a small and local conflict, but full-on war. And part of the reason why we had full-on war was that Europe had been very, very quiet in 2014. I think if the intervention in 2022 had happened 8 years earlier, we wouldn't have the war in Ukraine now. So, and I again, speaking of Israel and Gaza, that's another thing that took everyone by surprise. But just thinking back to 2014, in that case as well, it shouldn't have taken us by surprise. And I do believe that it took us because we have this sort of like grand narratives of history. And at the moment, we were trying to comfort ourselves to one that, I don't know, looked a bit too good to be true. And turned out it was.
And I also get the sense that just looking at history, that the genocide or what is happening in Gaza is part of the European imperial colonial project and the racism on which that project was built, and also elements of the Crusades, this European war against Islam that's been going on for I don't know how long. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm usually go ahead, Martin.
Well, I'll let you go first. I think it's better.
Well, I mean, that's a good question, but one that as a historian, I'm very suspicious of such long-term connections. So yes, colonialism, no crusades would be my short answer. I think the Crusades belong to a different time. Religion had a very different place in societies back then, in people's mental constructions of the world. I don't think we can think of the world today in the terms of the Crusades, or comparing them to the times of the Crusades and to the reasons why the Crusades were fought. I do think people are still, religion is still important, sure, but it's still played out in the context of a world that's mostly secular. Now, when it comes to colonialism, I couldn't agree more. I think what's going on now in Gaza and the conflict between Israel and Palestine is very much a colonial product. It's very much the product of colonial policies, which negatively affected both Jews and Arabs. I do think that colonial responsibilities also left out of the equation. I still remember Macron's visit in Lebanon in the aftermath of this calamity, this explosion that happened in Lebanon. And to me, his attitude was as if Lebanon was still a French colony. And of course, there are still French colonies. They're not called colonies anymore, that they're called overseas territories. But France still has quite a number of them, and so do other European powers. Their administration is, speaking of the legal terms, has very complex legal statuses, and some are, they differ between each other. But once again, this is a legacy that many European countries refuse to face, despite overwhelming evidence. So yes, my take on this is that we can and should absolutely link them to colonialism. The danger of linking them to the Crusades is reifying things, like thinking that Islam has been unchanged since the time of the Crusades. Christianity has been unchanged. Judaism has been unchanged. That's simply not true historically. All of them have transformed significantly over the centuries, and all of them are very different things than they used to be at the time of the Crusades.
Thank you. You wanted to say, Martin?
I wonder if you remember the demonstrations in Trafalgar Square when the events of Black September in the state of Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, took place. I don't either. On the 7th of October, a horrific atrocity was perpetrated by members of Hamas, supported by Iran, clearly. They couldn't have done it without Iran. It was probably planned with help from Iran. Now, explain to me, obviously the deaths of Palestinian Arabs in the Gaza Strip is a horror. How can you argue that that horror would have occurred equally if Hamas had given up the hostages it's still holding? And there is speculation that the reason why they're not releasing the women is they're being sexually abused. And because they don't want those stories told. Why is it a genocide Tell me about anybody in Gaza who's being killed because they are a Gazan Arab. The Nazis killed Jews because they were Jews. When the gas chambers were full, SS officers would throw a baby on top of the packed bodies inside the gas chamber on the basis that if they left one Jewish baby alive, there would be more Jews in the future and they would have another problem with the Jews. The intention was to kill every Jew in the territory occupied by the Nazis, and they intended to occupy a great deal more than they did. That was killing people because they were Jews. Tell me why the events in Gaza, horrific as they are, and much as I deplore them, and it can be condemned on several grounds. It's a horrific event in itself. There is an argument that it is an extremely unwise thing for the Israeli government to do, however you look at it. But why is it genocide?
The question, Martin, was, do you see a connection between what is happening in Gaza and racism and colonialism?
Well, I think the definition of colonialism is incredibly arbitrary. I mean, we've been talking about the Crusades, which of course are detested both by Muslims and by Jews. But Muslims think, of course, that the Muslim conquest was a wonderful thing. But horrors also happened during the Muslim conquests in the plural. It wasn't just the Middle East and North Africa, it also went eastwards. And, down to India, the horrific things happened. And if you look at, for example, the slave trade, of course, the transatlantic slave trade was a horror and deserves to be considered on the same basis as major genocide. It was genocidal. I mean, for every slave reaching the slave markets, ultimately, 7 people, so I've read, ultimately died in Africa. Because first of all, there would be the men who tried to defend the village who were killed. Then it would be that the less able-bodied people left behind wouldn't be able to raise the crops. So there would be starvation. There was a big market for eunuchs in the Arab slave markets. And Europeans participated, but again, my reading is that 4 men died to produce 1 live eunuch. The whole story is beyond horrific. And it wasn't just what people these days refer to as colonialism. It goes back much further. It involves far greater numbers of people. It involves Africans too, as traders and as slave hunters. The human race has its elbows, is up to its elbows in blood, not just Europeans, but others too. It needs to be recognized. Jews moved to what is now Israel and beyond for many decades before the Second World War out of religious motives. But clearly the Holocaust gave another impetus and caused another flood. Many Jews died because they were refused entry to that part of the world. My father, died, passed through Auschwitz and died in Buchenwald. His brother succeeded in setting foot in what was then mandatory Palestine, now the Kingdom of Jordan, the Arab territories, and Israel, and survived and raised a family without ever intending, God forbid, to harm a single hair on the head of an Arab. Very much the opposite. To the end of his life and beyond, he tried to promote good relations with the Arab population. When I say beyond his death, he left part of his legacy to activities to promote better understanding between Arabs and Jews. Now we have floods of people fleeing the Middle East for very understandable reasons. It's a pretty horrible place to live in most areas. And people expect to be let in to Europe, to Britain, to find a place of safety. But when Jews were fleeing from Europe to find a place of safety from the kind of death that my father in the end suffered, they were sent back, excluded, allowed to drown in the sea, sent back to Europe, or not allowed out of Europe in the first place. And they ended up dead. So what would you do if you and your family's life was in imminent danger? You would do whatever you could to save your life and their lives, perhaps in the opposite order. So to call all this colonialism when it was a question of saving lives is really missing the point.
How about you, Alex? What do you think? And also, if anyone listening has got questions, comments, if you could put them in the chat, that would be good, and then we'll come back to you.
That would probably refer to Heba, who put their hand up quite a while ago. So Heba, if you wouldn't mind, typing in your question or comment, and there might be also space for Q&A in the very end or not. I don't know.
There will be.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
A few minutes from now.
Yeah. So in terms of your question, Ambrose, I think the settler colonialist paradigm is extremely important and helpful for us to widen our perspective and to understand also in comparison what is going on in other countries, and also in terms of understanding how Israel came to be and what kind of settler colonial state and society it became. However, it's of course a very different story from the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, etc. And we have to bear those differences into we have to consider them. And of course, it's not an empire that drove that settler colonial project, but rather Jewish communities in Western Europe who were victimized by anti-Semites. So that's a huge difference. Also, it's not, of course, the only factor or the only mindset that leads us to where we are today. There are so many different other factors who tie in with settler colonialism, such as the Holocaust, the Second World War, the persecution of Jews in Arab countries after 1945, ethnic cleansing of Jews in Morocco, in Iraq, and you name it. So how is that settler colonialism if neighboring Arab countries expel their Jews and then they end up in Israel? So it's far more complicated, and I don't like this simplification of kind of just bringing it down to the settler colonialist paradigm, as useful as it might be. And then, of course, there's the notion of a settler colonialist genocide, which enriched genocide studies tremendously by opening up the sort of textbook of genocide to the United States and again Australia and other countries. And I think the settler colonialist genocides differ in nature from other genocides. It's just like a different dynamic. It's a different sort of book. So I think we need to start getting used to the fact that genocide, a complicated term, and as Raul said, we will never agree. Scholars, activists, lawyers, diplomats, etc., what a genocide really is. but there's different layers of genocide and different types of genocides, and they differ from each other considerably. In terms of labeling what's going on at the moment as a genocide, I'm also a skeptic, because I don't think it enriches the discussion or helps us in any way understanding what is going on. So I don't feel for myself, for my students, for the community within which I operate, that using the term and the concept genocide facilitates the discussion. Or then the discussion should also be a bit different. Was like, were the Hamas massacres in Israel, were they a genocide or not? I mean, they tried at least to kill every Jew they could find when entering into the south of Israel. So is that a genocide or not?
Oh, and Muslims, Bedouin and other Muslims.
Sorry, Martin.
Well, and Thai people were victimized as well. So I think when we as students of collective violence, I think we need to really kind of fine-tune our discussion and be really aware of the differences, and kind of having this huge umbrella of genocide under which we unite everything that we kind of don't like, or that we find horrendous or wrong, or so. The same with Putin's attack on Ukraine. People called it, and a very different audience of scholars and activists who call the Gaza case a genocide. They also were very, very quick at hand. Well, this is a genocide. I'm not convinced. For me, there were massacres that were sort of followed a military logic. For me, Gaza is an indiscriminate bombing and not a genocide. The Hamas attack on Israel, that was maybe an attempted genocide or just massacres. But again, like, let's keep our terminology a bit more measured. That would be my argument. And at the pro-Palestinian rallies that I saw here in Leicester, of course, genocide was all over the place, and one might argue that, but other posters were far worse, like accusing Israel of committing a Holocaust. That all said, I want to tell a little story or anecdote, because we had one of the leading genocide scholars nationally and internationally giving a talk at Leicester. Donald Bloxham, an internationally recognized Holocaust genocide scholar. And then over dinner, we started arguing a little bit about whether to label the war in or against Gaza a genocide. And the case why we discussed that was a friend of ours, another scholar, an Israeli scholar, Rashideh, who argues that is a clear textbook example of genocide, which I sort of found absurd. And I told Donald, why is he doing that? Does he have sort of, that's what I suspect, does he has beef with this home society in Israel? Why? So is it more like, does he want to alienate other people? But then Donald told me, Alex, no, pause, wait a minute. What if he is seriously concerned that things might go wrong or take the wrong turn, and what if he thinks as an Israeli that things might turn genocidal? Then I still would not agree with the language, because committing a genocide or turning into a genocidal direction is a huge difference for me. But it made me think, and the example of Rashideh, which also published in The Guardian, etc., discussing that I found quite intriguing and interesting.
Okay, thank you so much. As a Palestinian, actually, and as a human being, it's not our duty to convince you if it's a genocide happening in Gaza or not. It's your homework to go and to read and then to judge if what's happening in Gaza is genocide or not. But I will speak about the intent, which is the most difficult part in proving genocide or saying that something is happening called genocide. And intent is very available and valid in the public record for what the people in Gaza and Palestinians have been described when from the president to the military to every aspect of the Israeli was mentioning or calling, for example, about Palestinians as human animals or the children of the darkness, cutting off electricity, food, fuel, collective punishment for a civilian population, forced displacement of 1.70 million Palestinian civilians, including men, women, children, killing like every 15 minutes, one child is killed or is going to be killed in Gaza. It's actually war crimes against humanity. So I will not as Palestinian, and I will not do this to convince anybody or to educate anybody about if what's happening in Gaza is genocide or not, or if the really, as one of your speakers was asking about, if the target was against the Gazan people or not. So I will ask you to do your hard work and to do your homework, to go and to read, and then to ask the questions and to judge if what's happening in Gaza is genocide or not. And Gaza is part of Palestine.
And to the question that triggered all this, what are your thoughts on the connections between racism, the European imperial colonial project, and what we are seeing in Gaza?
Of course, we do see racism, and it's a part of settler colonization of Palestine and against Palestinians. You can see the racism in the support being provided, in the response, in the language and in the narrative, and how Palestinian civilian men, women, children are being described or identified. For example, like when let's say about a simple example of racism, when Palestinian children are killed, we say Palestinian children died, but because every human being is precious, and we cannot differentiate between people on the issue of race or ethnicity. But when other people are dying or being killed, we say that, yes, they are killed, these children are killed, but Palestinians normally die. Palestinians can be forcibly displaced, but other parts of the world, no, people cannot be forcibly displaced because of the color, because of the race, because of the religion, because of their background. So yes, I do believe, and we see this, and it's not me to tell you, to give you an examples. You can see this in everyday rhetoric, in everyday language and narrative about how Palestinians are being dehumanized at every level, even when somebody denied to say that, yes, they are facing mass displacement, mass killing, genocide, disproportionate and indiscriminate bombing. So when we fear to say things as they are, when we use wrong language and narrative, actually, we support that narrative of settler colonization and the oppression, and also increasing the racism against people. It's a human days rights, and I do believe every human being deserves to live in dignity, in peace, in freedom, deserve protection, deserve a family, deserve a parent. So it's really a good and strong question for every one of us to say now, to ask this moral question, because like history will not forget, and people will not forget. And if you want to be convinced, it's easily you can convince, but it requires a lot of courage, a lot of sharp mind, and also a lot of moral consistency, which are not a lot of people actually have it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Basma. And then we hear from Heba. And if anyone else wants to say something, if you unmute and say, other than the speakers, if you want to say something, unmute and let us hear you. Yes, Heba.
Thanks for this conversation. So actually, I'm Palestinian. I am from Gaza. My family, they lives in Gaza. My whole entire family in Gaza. I am the only one who's abroad. I am studying in the UK. I am PhD student and I am healthcare professional in the UK as well. It's, as I wrote in the chat box, it's quite sad to see this argument and to discuss if this is a genocide or not. Thousands of children killed within a matter of 60 days. Civilians killed in Gaza. Pregnant women killed. And we just discussed if this genocide or not. Why? And the other thing, the speakers here, they all of them, they talked about Hamas, what Hamas did on the 7th of October. Why you didn't talk about Israel? Why you didn't talk what Israel? The Israeli army, they bomb people while they are inside their houses. Imagine that. There is no like help for these people to get to rescue them, even if they're still alive, to rescue them from under the rubble.
Well, Heba, each of us did. I did, Martin did, Basma did. So you're misrepresenting here what we were saying.
Okay. So what happened? So there is no justification to what happened on the 7th of October by Hamas. But the only thing that I can say, as Palestinians, we are suffering for ages. It's not something new, okay? And Israel is a state founded by the bloods or in the bloods of Palestinians in 1948. And it's sad when I hear some Holocaust survivor. Like I know, because I have met some here in Scotland. Like they are against what Israel they are doing, and they are not like they don't even want to be represented by Israel, because this is what happened to them. And it's funny to say that the abused has become the abuser, and this government now in Israel, they are the grandchildren of the people who were Nazi survivor, and they are doing the same to us. So yes, I can say what's happening to us, it's another Holocaust to Palestinians. And it's up to you if you don't agree with that or not, but that's what's happening. Like for me, like just sorry, last thing, for me, I can't talk to my family. Oh, I since the conflict in Gaza, I am not able to talk to my family. I don't know what's happening to them. I only follow the news to check where the bombing happened, if it's happened to my family area, or to see the list of people.
This is absurd, and this is what you compare to a Holocaust. You can't WhatsApp friends.
Sorry, Alex.
No, this is absurd. I can't take it.
Alex.
Yeah.
Let's give people space to say what they want to say. We'll come back to you. You will have a chance to respond. Carry on, Eba.
Yeah, this is Holocaust. Thousands of children killed within 60 days. This has never happened before. And it's funny actually to say what happened 80 years ago, and you want to compare it to, yes, this is not Holocaust. What happened? Why when everyone talk about the Holocaust, they are considered anti-Semitism, which is funny because we are Palestinian. If anyone talk about us against us, there will be actually anti-Semitism, not the Israel, because these Israeli people, they are not Semitism even. They are part from East European, etc. But anyway, this is not my argument. What I meant here about the Holocaust. Thousands of children killed, again, pregnant women. By the way, I am midwife. Actually, I'm midwife. I work here in Turkey as midwife. It's sad for me when my colleagues, they were killed. Why midwives or doctors? obstetricians were killed in Gaza. Why? Are they Hamas fighters? They work in the hospital and they were killed while they were working in the hospital, or even after they finish their shift, when they go home. For some reasons, airstrike just struck their houses and they were killed. Why? I can't understand that. Why Israeli army targeting journalists, doctors, UN workers? Why they are targeting school shelters where civilians they go to seek refuge? Why do you do that? Is this not Nazi actions? Please just try to be, I don't know, try to be not biased. Just use your logic mind, and that's all from me.
Thank you, Heba. Caroline, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to say that I study colonialism, and so I do see what's happening in Gaza as a question of colonial genocide, as you raised. I think the Holocaust was terrible, but I don't think that it can be used as an excuse for this. The whole question of never again is not just never again for Jewish people. It should be never again for anyone. I think that it's necessary to face up to the fact that what is going on is genocidal in order to be able to stop it. We have to call it out.
Thank you, Caroline. Now we go back to our speakers, but before, as part of your response, maybe if you could tell us how you define genocide.
Sorry,
No, I'm going back to the speakers. Okay. So you can respond. Do
you want me to start, Ambrose?
Yeah, please.
Because I really want to engage with some of the things that Basma and Heba said,
but start with a definition of genocide.
Sure. I mean, again, like I said, I'm not going to give you a definition because I don't think there is one. The one that exists is the UN definition, the UN Convention definition. If you want, I can read you that. But
no, please don't.
I mean, it's killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions. I mean, the problem with the definition is that even that definition.
Okay, sorry, Alex. Raul, that is a very good start. Let's start with that definition. If you could.
Okay. Let me read it then. Okay, then point A, killing members of the group. Point B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Point C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Point D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. Point E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Now, let me give you my brief take on genocide and the problem we have with it. The obsession to try to prove that some case is genocide makes us overlook victims of mass violence that is not genocide. There is a good friend and colleague of mine, Christian Axbo Nielsen, who wrote about this in the context of the Yugoslav wars, because the game there was also everyone was claiming this is genocide. And eventually, the only recognized genocide is the mass murder of 8,000 Muslim men and boys at Srebrenica in 1995. That is the only part of the Yugoslav wars that's officially recognized as a case of genocide. Now, what he was saying, and I think he's absolutely right, is that there were war crimes committed in many other places. There were crimes against humanity committed in many other places. And these are absolutely capital crimes. They are not small crimes. They don't imply dehumanizing the victims. Saying that someone is guilty of war crimes is a very serious accusation. And I do think in the case of both Ukraine and Gaza, this obsession with demonstrating genocide actually works against the victims. And Heba was talking about aerial bombings and indiscriminate bombings. Agree, but so were the Allies indiscriminately bombing Germany in 1944 and 1945. Can we say that England was engaged in genocide against the Germans? I think nobody in their right mind would say that. But at the same time, it would be dehumanizing to the German victims to claim that this indiscriminate aerial bombing of cities like Dresden or Berlin did not happen, because they killed tens of thousands of civilians. And these were raids not aimed at military facilities. They were aimed at terrorizing the civilian population, at retaliating against the German indiscriminate bombing of English cities, which had happened earlier. but these were civilian victims of a crime that can't possibly be described as genocide. But again, it doesn't mean that these were not war crimes. It doesn't mean that these people were not victims. People can be victims of mass violence that is not genocide. And I think the fact that we insist on genocide makes us blind to the fact that serious, very serious crimes, a crime against humanity by the very name is very serious. You can't take a crime against humanity lightly and claim it's minor. Of course, it's an absolute horrendous crime. And I think instead of trying to prove genocide in the case of either Ukraine or, and I know my Ukrainian friends didn't like me when I said that. I suppose you don't like me when I say it to you, but a crime against humanity is a horrible thing to be guilty of. And I think ethnic cleansing, I'm absolutely fine with notions of ethnic cleansing. We can discuss that. I don't think we have a case to discuss genocide, but I think we should be discussing seriously ethnic cleansing, war crimes, crimes against humanity. Those are the three things that I think can be discussed reasonably and with possible proof, because again, there are ways to document these in the case of Gaza, just as in the case of Ukraine. I don't think we have a case in either scenario for making the claim for genocide, for the big G word. But I think, like I said, that the word can also be an obstacle. It's not always helpful. And the same goes with the comparison with the Holocaust. The Holocaust was invoked on both sides. When Hamas attacked Israel, some Jews said this is the second Holocaust. No, it wasn't. Look at the scale. 1,700 people dead versus 6 million is not the same. We can't say it's the same. The same goes for the Israeli attacks on Gazans. They were undertaken, as Martin was saying, with a very different modus operandi. They weren't going after they're not trying to kill, at least at the moment, every Gazan in the Gaza Strip. There's no evidence of that. But at the same time, raising the alarm, I think is important. Alex was saying that. I do think many times Rwanda is a case in point. They concluded it was a genocide after the genocide happened. So I think it is important to raise the alarm about the potential, the possibility of escalation into a genocide. But that again, there is if we say something is genocide when it isn't, it's actually an obstacle to us recognizing the potential for something escalating into genocide. And again, this is not in any way trying to diminish the victimhood of those people. Any civilian anywhere being killed is an absolute crime against humanity, and it's something that should be condemned, even if it doesn't fit the bill of genocide. And again, just think of the German victims in 1945, and then how absurd the claim of genocide against Germans would sound. But there were tens of thousands of civilians killed, men, women, children. So there are civilian victims in conflict. There are other crimes than genocide, and I think the ones that we can prove are just as important as the ones that, for various ideological reasons, we want to invoke.
Thank you, Raul. How about you, Martin? If again you could also start with a definition of genocide.
Well, the definition of genocide is very difficult. I recommended a particular book because I don't agree with everything in the book. And by the way, the book is not particularly pro-Israel, but it does provoke a lot of thought about the detail of this problem. The United Nations definition is highly unsatisfactory. It was a filthy compromise involving the Soviet Union, which wanted to be excluded from accusations of genocide when it had transported whole populations to terrible conditions, lethal conditions. So it's such a complicated subject that I don't think that would be very profitable. There are definitions readily available. You can avail yourself of those. I am not in favor of the death of any human being. I would like every Gazan citizen to live in safety, good health, freedom, prosperity, and happiness. But if somebody lunges at me with a knife and I shoot him, I've got the defense of self-defense to protect my own life. And under those circumstances, I would not be condemned by the law. So it's a complicated business. My cousin,
but with self-defense, you know, for individuals, there are questions around proportionality. Even for individuals, you cannot plead self-defense.
The question about proportionality is always whether you
and
want
Israel is a
one
state.
life for one life, or whether the proportionality involves action which prevents extension of the original offense. So the proportionality is not as straightforward as many people think. But can I tell you that my cousin, you know, with whom I was great friends, we grew up together, we both qualified as doctors. He ended up working in the Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, funded by an American women's charity that provides about 10% of its funds. It's mostly the Israeli state and the health system which funds it. More than half of his patients.
Sorry, before we
more
do
than
that,
half of his patients were Arab.
Martin, before
many
we do
of them came from the Gaza Strip.
Let me try and understand if I got you right. Are you saying that what Israel is doing right now to Palestinians in Gaza, also to people in the West Bank and the other occupied Palestinian territories, are you saying that that is self-defense?
Look, I'm not an Israeli politician. I'm not shouldered with that responsibility. It is a it is a terrible, terrible situation. I don't want the death of any citizen of the Gaza Strip, not even if there are members of Hamas. However, the Israelis are faced with the problem of protecting their own lives. It is clear that Hamas wanted to do a great deal more than it actually succeeded in doing. And the Israelis are fighting for their lives. So under those circumstances, somebody like me sitting here safely in the UK pontificating about that is an obscenity. The Israelis are fighting for their lives.
How about you, Alex? What do you think? And again, if you start with the definition of genocide.
Yeah, thank you. As for the definition of genocide, I would like to cut it short, as Raul actually summarized it the very similar way than I see it. I think we need to distinguish between genocide, ethnic cleansing, and war crimes or crimes against the humanity. Of course, these overlap, that is clear, and ethnic cleansing can lead into genocide, and very, very soon and early, and we need to be aware of the warning signs wherever they happen. I also don't like sort of the abuse of the Holocaust for political gains, and that goes for both sides, as Raul said. I mentioned examples that I witnessed in Leicester on pro-Palestine rallies. I didn't like that. The same goes the other way around. So commentators keep on saying this has been the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, the Hamas raid into Israel. That might well be true, but do we really need that Holocaust reference in order to tell the fact that 1,200 Israelis have been killed? No, we actually don't need that. So this is also kind of well, instrumentalizing the victims in my view. Now, I think I have an issue with the tone of our discussion, and for me that is sort of a prime example for how the debate of genocide can go wrong, because there is this obsession, we need to apply that term, there is this competition for victimhood, if there is a mass crime, if there's mass deaths, and we don't use the G word, that there is always like a certain amount of upset that why is it not a genocide? And so for me, this is just another example how wrong that whole debate can be. And actually that led me early in the career of trying to abandon the genocide term altogether. There's some clear-cut cases where the framework might be useful, but actually, whether it's Russia or whether it's Palestine or whether it's any other cases that we witness now, the paradigm for me does not work. And it's funny because what we had here at our panel was actually a great amount of agreement to some, well, I mean, Martin, of course, changed his position a little bit, but we all condemn what's going on in Gaza. We all mourn all the civilian deaths that are happening in Gaza. And then I have to be lectured here at the panel that I didn't do my homework because I don't use the genocide word, or because I feel like being accused of ignorance and having not read enough, because I don't come to the same conclusions as some of our listeners or co-panelists. And I find that surprising, because the starting point was actually a condemnation of violence. But because we don't agree in terminology, and we obviously don't, this seems to be all of a sudden a very, very stark disagreement, which I, again, think it's not. And so this is the point that leaves me a little bit puzzled or in surprise, indeed.
There's a question for you from Caroline, who's asking, when would you?
Yeah,
when would you use?
I think I said that again in the. So I'm again a historian, and it's very difficult with events as when they are unfolding to label them as a genocide or not. Again, I think we need an alert system. We don't want that to happen ever again. Often it's too early to tell. And often ethnic cleansing turns into genocide, or it doesn't. Sometimes there is an attempted genocide that does not properly unfold. But historically, when there was the physical destruction of a huge proportion of a group, whether that's the Jews or the Armenians, that is a clear case of genocide. Bosnian Muslims in Bosnia, that's more tricky, because there were some genocidal massacres where every male person was killed. But the bigger picture was, well, again, looks genocidal, but is a single massacre a genocide? I would say no. We need sort of a larger and more coherent policy. So that's why I would say the Hamas massacres in the south of Israel, there were massacres and not a genocide, or the Russian massacres in Ukraine. They also don't add up to a big picture of a full genocide. So again, I think more caution is needed, and we don't need the word in order to be super critical and angry and passionate about war crimes that are being committed, or crimes against the humanity. And I wish, even though I agree with Martin that there is like an element of self-defense, I totally wish the Israeli army would have a very, very, very different strategy there. But genocide is carpet bombing is not genocide. Carpet bombing is carpet bombing.
How about you, Basma? What do you think?
Yes, I will start from the end, and then I will reply for the words. When you are, according to international humanitarian law, when you are the occupier, you don't have the right to self-defense. And it's not Basma that's saying this. Go to the international humanitarian law and Geneva Convention and read that, and will you find that? And this is number one. Number two, about the issue of genocide. My definition, actually, and I hope all of you can go to this definition, it's for the director of a New York office of the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights, who have resigned, and in his resignation as international human rights lawyer, he mentioned and he provided a very clear definition of a genocide legally, historically, and also socially and politically, that can be applied not only to the situation of Palestine and what's happening in Gaza as a part of Palestinian territory, but also can be applied to what's happening in Ukraine, to what's happening in different parts of the world in the history and recently. So I encourage you to go and to read the definition of the director of the New York director for the UN High Rights Commission. And the third point of view about the genocide, again, as a Palestinian, as a victim of this genocide, or as a victim seeing my people have been suffered or still suffering from mass displacement, mass killing, mass slaughter, forced displacement, ethnic cleansing, and as a product of this ethnic cleansing as well, I am not here and I will not here to educate anybody or to convince anybody or to please anybody by giving a certain terms which I don't feel confident and convinced myself. And the importance here, it's now, as I mentioned before, I am not lecturing, but this is a critical moment of moral consistency, that we have to say things as they are, reverting back not only to the history, but to the definitions that are in the International Humanitarian Law, Geneva Convention, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and all of these are clear enough for us as an adult, as a professionals in our career or in our sectors, to say things as they are and to be morally consistent. This is my reply. I stand with every human being. I stand for the rights of every human being, the right for freedom, for living in peace, for living in dignity, the right to self-determination, the right to have agency. But this cannot be happen for people who are under oppression, whether in Palestine or outside Palestine, without justice. No justice, no peace. And this is very important. Every human being, we cannot be free. I cannot be free. Anybody here in this call cannot be free, regardless of your privilege, white privilege, lived experiences, lived expertise. You are a victim of Holocaust or not. With all my respect, we stand with you. We stand with our people who say not again, not in our name. We stand with these people, and because we understand the importance of justice, the importance of peace, the importance of living in dignity in a free world. We cannot be free. We cannot lecture people about freedom and justice and peace and genocide and history without being morally consistent with what we know, with what we read, and with what we see. This is a genocide unfolding in front of our eyes. We have to be brave enough, moral enough, consistent enough to look and to hear from the international human rights lawyer, from UN organizations, from spokesmen, from doctors, from everybody describing what's happening by using, for example, war on children. Recently, the spokesman of UNICEF said it's a war on children within in Gaza. I am here just want really to tell this message. I am not speaking because I am only a Palestinian, but as a human being, accountable professional, accountable academic, we need to say things as they are, because we are accountable in front of future generations. People will be asking how we describe things, how we defend things, how the language was, how the narrative was. So we need to change that, and we need to be morally consistent and revert back to the international humanitarian laws, Geneva Conventions, legal terms to describe things which are clear enough. Thank you so much.
How about you, Heba and Caroline? What do you think?
Thanks. So I just want to ask you, or just think about what's happening in Gaza at the moment. Imagine you are sitting at your home. You are a civilian sitting at your home. You are trying to find food, water for your family, and suddenly you are under the rubble, and you don't know about your family members. What do you call this? Or you are seeking refuge in a school. There is no beds. You're sleeping on the floor. There is no water. There is no toilets. Thousands of people they have queue for toilets. There is no bread. There is no flour. People, they searching for basic human requirements from city to city. And if they are lucky, they will find some of the flour and go to their family. If not, Israeli snipers, they will kill them. Although some people they hold like white flags or white t-shirts where they are walking in the street. They are civilians, to say that they are not fighters. They have been killed. They have been shot by Israeli snipers. I don't know what do you call this. The hospitals, they are out of service. There's no medication. There is no drug for people who have diabetes. They need insulin. They are run out of insulin. Pregnant women who need blood thinners, they don't have any. Pregnant women, they give birth in shelter schools. There is no clothes for these displaced people in the schools. Yes, there are some humanitarian aids, few actually allowed to enter Gaza, but it's not enough, and still not enough here for displaced people.
How about you, Caroline?
Yeah, well, I just want to say that, you know, what's happening in Gaza is unbearable and it must stop. You know, to me, that's the kind of bottom line. And yeah, and we have to kind of work in whatever way we can towards that. But I was also interested, I'm sorry I couldn't be at the session on Friday, but I wondered what conclusions came on that occasion about the question of genocide.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So, because if we're almost out of time, I'll come back to you on the statements on the genocide in Gaza separately. But for now, maybe we go back to our speakers and you know, thinking about this moment where we are now with what Israel is doing in Gaza, and also the other occupied Palestinian territories. What needs to happen next, and who needs to do what? And this is a question for all of you.
I mean, if I may start, I couldn't agree more with Heba. I think it doesn't matter what we want to call it. We need a ceasefire and we need this to stop. That's in my book, in terms of what needs to happen, is this. I also want to answer Caroline's question about when would you use the term genocide. And I would use it when there's a clear intent to destroy a group, at least part of that group, systematically and as a group. So if, I mean, the prime example is the Holocaust, because that's when the term genocide was coined. It means you target every person of that origin, irrespective of the difficulties you might have to get them and to deport them. An example of this, the Germans in 1944, they're having massive shortages, but they still invest in transporting the Jews of Thessaloniki from Greece all the way to Auschwitz to be gassed in Poland. That's the kind of systematic, intentional kind of murder you need to have for a genocide. That does not diminish crimes against humanity. That does not diminish war crimes. It does not diminish other forms of mass violence. I do think other forms of mass violence are taking place in Gaza at the moment. I think they need to stop. And I think that is extremely important and pivotal. I don't think what's going on is genocide, and I don't think it needs to be genocide. I think we need to acknowledge that there is mass violence going on against civilians, and that needs to stop. And Heba, what you were describing about the conditions in Gaza right now, they could be true word by word for Berlin 1945. And that, again, would be, no one would say Berliners under aerial bombing, systematic aerial bombing by the Allies in 1945 were experiencing genocide.
How about you, Martin and Alex? What needs to happen next? Who needs to do what?
You know, my cousin, who was also my friend and became a doctor at the Nasser Hospital in Jerusalem, more than 50% of his patients in this hospital, which is 10% funded by an American women's charity, you know, from the country whose flag is trampled and burnt in Arab countries. More than half of his patients were Arab. Many of them were from the Gaza Strip. Even when, under the Oslo Accords, the funding for the healthcare of those citizens had been transferred to the ruling authority in Gaza. They still came to Jerusalem to get treatment from my Jewish cousin. And he did his absolute best for them. I accompanied him. I could tell you lots of stories, but there obviously isn't time. I am astonished in the accounts by some of the people in this meeting not to hear any condemnation of what Hamas did on the 7th of October. I don't believe that more than 0.1% of people, Israelis currently fighting in Gaza, would want to fight there if Israel had not been attacked. And indeed, if a threat had not been made to repeat the same kind of thing.
Sorry, Martin. Were there, in the ghettos when the Nazis were during the Holocaust, were there Jewish resistance fighters?
Yes.
Would you condemn them?
No.
So why are you asking Palestinians to condemn Hamas?
First of all, let me say that a lot of Palestinians condemn Hamas. You know, there is now a growing wave of opinion amongst Israeli Arabs, Muslims, who support Israel rather than Hamas. They realize that Hamas is violent and extorts and commits all sorts of crimes. Many Gazans hate Hamas. They're, of course, living under a brutal dictatorship. Following the elections in which Hamas was elected, which the Palestinian Authority contested, members of the Palestinian Authority were thrown from high buildings. It's not all brotherly love in there. There are many horrors. And the other thing is a sense of perspective. I mean, you know, I don't want any harm to any citizen of Gaza. But when the genocide in Gaza, in Darfur, was in its early stages, I went on a march from Cambridge to London to protest in the company of people, refugees from Darfur. And where were the Muslims? You know, the Darfur refugees who were with me were Muslims. But where were the other Muslims? There were one or two, literally. There were lots of people who were not Muslims. Why this failure to mention the horrific crimes committed by Hamas to get things into proportion? I'm not in favor of the killing of anybody in the Gaza Strip. But things you need to look at both sides.
How about you, Alex? What needs to happen next? And who needs to do what?
We will not be able to influence what's happening next. I do hope very much that Hamas will disappear for good, that they will never be able to kill or massacre anybody anytime soon again, that they won't be able to execute gay Palestinians ever again, as they did for the last time in 2015. At the same time, I hope that the right-wing Israeli government will go away and never return. So that would be my optimistic hope for the outcome of the conflict, but we cannot influence that. In terms of what we can do, and debating and talking to each other and with each other is, of course, something we can and we need to do. I was quite surprised really how antagonizing this debate became over the use of the G word, because actually everybody here in this panel is very critical of both things, of the massacres of the 7th October, of course, how could you not, but also of the type of warfare that is being launched against the Gaza Strip. And so I don't understand why we weren't kind of looking out for more of the common ground instead of focusing in a very negative way on the use of the G term. And so this was not a very pleasant experience, I think, for me. So being accused of moral indifference, or being accused of not having done my homework. Seriously, I've been a genocide scholar for 15 or 20 years. I read the news every day. I try to keep up on top what's happening, and I'm shocked by what's happening. And so again, the discussion of whether it is a genocide or not, it's extremely harmful to the dialogue or to the debate more broadly. And I think activists who campaign for the Palestinian cause, they should pause a minute and think about it, how antagonizing that actually can be, and a dialogue, a discussion, a debate should start. So this was an attempt. I think I learned lesson for the next debate that will follow, and I hope all our other panelists and listeners did the same.
Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Basma?
Okay, for me, it's very important now to end the occupation and to ceasefire now, to ceasefire for Palestinians, because Palestinian children, women, men in Gaza deserve life, freedom, dignity, self-determination, agency, and also freedom. And then I would encourage everyone here and everyone outside, I don't know who's listening as well, really to educate ourselves, because we are not perfect and we will need educating ourselves at every level, reading well the context and the history in order then to judge on actions, on words. And my recommendation for myself and for everybody, say things as they are, particularly when they are clear enough legally, clear enough historically, clear enough politically, clear enough socially. Just say things as they are, because you are accountable to yourself as a professional, as a human, as an academic, as whatever kind of sector you belong. And also, generations coming, future generations will ask this question about how language, how narrative, how expertise was used to describe things, to define things as they are, and to humanize people, to humanize the narrative and the language, and to give rights and justice for the victims of genocide, regardless where they are. If they are in Palestine, occupied Palestine, West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, Ukraine, wherever they are, you do your homework morally, critically, as a professional, as a human being, to support and to humanize the narrative and say things as they are, because it really matters. Thank you so much.
Well, Basma, that's what we all are doing, and we come to different conclusions. So here we are.
How about you, Heba and Caroline? What needs to happen next, and how do we get there?
I think it's really good to have open discussion like that, and to hear different perspectives and different thoughts on what's happening. For me, to be honest, I don't care what's this called. I just want this to stop, and I hope this to stop, to be honest. I think as Palestinians and as Israeli people, I hope this conflict will finish anyway, will end one day, but to be honest, I doubt it. But let's hope that some solution in the middle will happen between Israeli and Palestinians, and never wars happen again.
Thank you. How about you, Caroline?
Well, I think I mean, the difficulty for me has been with political leadership. It's bad all around. I mean, and for example, 60% of Americans say they support a ceasefire, and yet, the government doesn't listen. I think that for that reason, sort of working on the grassroots level is something we have to keep doing.
Thank you. So on that note, I'll say thank you very much to our speakers, Alex Korb, Raul, Cârstocea, Martin Stein, and Basma. We organized this event today, and okay, Basma El Doukhi, thank you very much. We organized this event precisely because the environment we are in is really, really difficult. It is horrifying watching the excessive amounts of violence that are taking place, the deaths that are coming with them, and also the destruction. And we think that this needs to stop. It needs to stop immediately, right away. We need to go back to discussion as a way of solving problems. You know, we will not solve problems by killing each other. We solve problems by looking at the problems and looking for solutions that do not involve killing each other. You know, this is what the Leicester Human Rights Arts and Film Festival believes. We also believe that you know, we need to center our humanity, all of our humanity, and start and work and build from there. So this conversation is part of that. You know, we bring in all those views, we need them. And then by talking, hopefully we come to understand one another. And when we understand one another, we can look for solutions, for ways of working that work for all of us, that don't involve one group trampling on another group. So this is where the idea of organizing this event came from. And we are going to keep coming back to this conversation for as long as there is war, for as long as armies are killing people, as long as armed groups are killing other people. We'll keep coming back to these conversations until the killings stop, because there is room for all of us in this world. You know, we should learn to live with each other. So on that note, I will say again, thank you very much, everyone. And this has been the 10th Leicester Human Rights Arts and Film Festival. Even though the festival ends today, we will keep working on the issues for as long as it takes. Thank you.
Rose, I certainly endorse your sentence that there is room for every one of us in this world, and we should proceed on that basis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambrose.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thank you.